My name is Annie. This is Cheryl. We started Greens just about 3 years ago on this property, and we now have a second property on the West Bank. And Cheryl?
We thought maybe it'd be a good idea to go around and give your name and maybe why you're interested in being here, or if you work here, which many of you do. And if you have anything specific you want to learn about, either that's on the sheet or not on the sheet.
I'll start this way.
Hi, my name is Christian. I'm from Aimee.
Interesting.
A lot of what you all said brings me back to why I started farming, and that still resonates with me. Annie and I, we didn't grow up around here. We're both from the Northeast. I'm from kind of upstate New York. Annie's from Brooklyn, New York. I finally convinced Annie to leave New York City, show her that the world exists beyond those city limits. And we lived down here about 10 years ago. And that's when I first got really into growing in this community, in this climate. I was involved in some different community gardens. I just loved it. Like, I couldn't get enough. And like many of you, found it really hard to find opportunities here to learn more about growing, to learn more about production agriculture. And still, I think it's really a challenge. So we're hoping to be just a small part of the way that people can start learning. I think Grow Louisiana is going to be a huge part of that. And it took a little while for us to get back here. Like I said, we moved here 10 years ago. We moved away. I went to a farm school. Literally just called a farm school. And farmed in Massachusetts for about 6-7 years. But New Orleans was always felt a little more like home than New England. And 3 years ago, we finally decided to come down here and make the farm dream happen, or at least attempt to make it happen. So that brings us to this lot here. This lot is 20,000 square feet, which is roughly half an acre in just total square footage. We are growing on about 1/3 of an acre if you count all of the bed space. This lot is owned by friends of ours who actually lived with and were our landlords 10 years ago when we lived here. It used to be apartment buildings. Before Katrina, it was cinder block apartment buildings. There were 2 of them. They were not rehabilitated after the storm. They were eventually taken down in 2011, I believe. And this lot was just filled with sand, like river sand, probably 8 to 12 inches of it. And as we walk around, you'll see how sandy it is. But when we got here, it was just a lawn. Our friends had been having it mowed every month. They were really excited for us to try and farm on it. They do not charge us, which is incredibly generous of them. We do have a lot of landlords. Our friends own it with their extended family, so there are 7 landlords. But they're pretty chill. It's been good. But it has meant that from the beginning, we've been really careful to follow the rules, so to speak. There are many ways, I think, to set up a farm in this city, or to start growing stuff on the lot. For us, we made the decision to go through the city permitting process for certain infrastructure, just so that we knew that if any issues came up, we kind of had our backs covered when answering to our landlords, one of whom is an insurance person. So she was pretty clear up front that she wanted all of these boxes checked. But it does make starting a business a little more adventurous when you have to go through the city department, permitting departments, and for us here, we're also in a historic district, so we had to contend with that. So when we me back up a little to just arriving on the vacant lot here and figuring out kind of how to turn that soil over. As I mentioned, this soil is so sandy that we were actually able to just sink a shovel into it and flip over the sod into the center of our beds. So we mapped out all of these beds. They're roughly 45 feet in length for the most part, and that's pretty lucky because I kind of like things in 50-foot chunks. And by that I mean actually 45 to 50 feet, so you have a little extra space on your ends if you have things like landscape fabric or grow cover. They tend to come in like numbers that are easily divisible by 50 or 100. And I find that if my bed is actually 50 feet and I cut it up into 50-foot lengths, I always end up with like a 40-foot length at the end, because it's not the bed. So that's a little trick that I picked up along the way, which has actually been very beneficial. But yeah, so we laid it all out, and then
we like took a really long tape measure and just figured out what the length was and how many beds we could fit in, and then used like we have that little thing, basically a yardstick.
Yeah.
And just put it down on the ground and say, okay, we want 36 on center, 30 on center.
40. These are 48 inches on center.
48 on center.
38 on center, roughly 30-inch bed tops.
Just used like a couple of ground stakes and a string to mark out the length, and then we just went along the edge of it and flipped the soil over on top.
Yeah, we spent about 2 to 3 weeks making beds in, half-day chunks, as much as we can handle. It was November at that point, so it was nice working weather. And then once we made those beds over by St. Claude first. As soon as we literally just dug out the pathways, flipped the sod onto where we wanted the growing space to be, and then we just covered it all in tarps, and we left for a holiday break for like about a month. And we came back in January, and this was January 2018, where we had that deep freeze.
Deep for 7 days.
Yeah, I mean, it was like in the 20s for 3 days. There was snow in our backyard. So luckily we hadn't actually planted anything. We were a little behind. We were supposed to have planted stuff. But we missed that and actually put our first seeds in the ground about a week after that freeze. And I wish I could show you a picture of what that soil looked like. It was just so pale, beachy looking. And we seeded into it. I don't have the Jang seeder here. I forgot to bring it back from our other farm property on the West Bank, but I do have a picture of it. And we put some of our first seeds in the ground with the Jang, and it was just like really gnarly. We got compost from Schmelly's Compost. If any of y'all know Nico, they grow really beautiful compost, but not in the quantity that we needed. Like Nico brought a load of like 10 yards for us, and that only lasts us here for like 6 weeks, because our plan for the last 3 years on this space has just been to load it up with compost. Because it's so sandy, the organic matter of the soil was 1, where ideally it's more like 5, even higher if you're lucky. So we knew that we had a lot of work to do with like just our soil texture.
It's gonna be a challenge.
One of the adventures of urban growing. Like those first days that we seeded, it was like chunks of debris. Like the compost is really great, but there's also some trash in it. There's some like wood chips. The Jang seeder, it was my first time using it. Like it can just handle it. So for anyone who's trying to start a growing operation down here and you want something that can get the job done on like rough, early in operation conditions before like you've really got that nice soil tilth, which for us is going to take years on our West Bank property, and I know Layla, you're probably going to experience something similar at Sugar Roots because it's we're neighbors and it's the same soil. It's like, it's easy to feel discouraged in the beginning and be like, how am I going to even break through the crust of this soil to get anything to germinate? But the Jang can do it. We've been doing it with the Jang. This is like the one tool that I recommend anyone who's really serious about producing a lot of food in a small space and doing successions. It's more expensive than, say, an earthway seeder, which is about $100, and can get the job done. The earthway could definitely get the job done on this soil, but I don't think the earthway can handle the heavy clay that's so prevalent around here. So there are certain things that I think are really worth investing. A little more money up front if you can afford it, and the Jang is like my number one tool that I would recommend doing that with. Yeah, so Annie asked if I wanted to talk about what we decided to grow. I can talk a little bit about that. Because this is such a small space, we decided pretty early on that we wanted to grow really high value crops to make it worth it. We decided also early on that we wanted to be a for-profit production farm where our mission was pretty straightforward: to grow vegetables and to sell vegetables. Because we had just come from Massachusetts where there was just such a, like, the farm to table, or like this small farm CSA culture is very prevalent. We lived in a town with like 20 farms for like 20,000 people. Farms that, like, you know, there were like half a dozen farm stands, half a dozen CSAs. It's just everywhere. You can, like, they're not going to miss us, you know, if we don't farm there. But we felt like here there was a lot of interest in fresh local vegetables and not a lot of places to get it other than the farmers markets, which not everyone can get to, and certain grocery stores carry fresher stuff, but again, it's pretty sparse, and we wanted to just add to the community of local growers here and meet that need. So that was pretty simple for us. Like, let's just grow as much food as we can.
Two questions. Can I get one of those first? And did the pandemic put a dent in your process?
The pandemic. So the pandemic produced a higher demand than ever for our products. We did change how we marketed, and we can talk a little bit about that. We had been doing a farmer's market and had just started doing a CSA. There was an online pre-order system, and we decided to switch 100% to the CSA. And that required more packaging, bins and stuff, so there were some costs associated with it, but the demand just skyrocketed. We went from doing, our goal was to do like 45 CSA shares a week plus the market, to do it over 200 a week in like 3 weeks.
I'm not interested in how you irrigate.
Are we irrigate? Yeah, we'll talk a little about irrigation.
It looks now.
Yeah, I mean,
Hoses.
Underneath,
In terms of marketing for retail, I know it's like one thing if you're selling to restaurants, you can just walk into the back door and offer a sample to some chefs. But like, when you're marketing for retail, are you spreading like word about your products through like entirely social media, or was it like word of mouth? Like, how'd you jump from the pop-up at Solo to like Crescent City, and like how'd you get more people who are buying for home?
So for the Solo market, we put up flyers. Like, I handmade some flyers to put up around the neighborhood at local businesses that have bulletin boards, like other cafes and stuff, saying there's a farm stand, fresh local veggies. We put some up around here. And then we have a strong social media presence. We've tried to have a strong social media presence from the beginning. Annie's very diligent about posting and taking pretty pictures. That definitely helped. And then the refresh market, like Annie was talking about, is...
We also had people signing up for a newsletter at Solo. So like when we first started there, we just started adding email addresses and just getting more people interested.
it's saying like, would you be interested in a CSA? Would you be interested in like a regular thing? Just trying to like, yeah, many ways trying to just be visible. And yeah, like you're saying for chefs, we would just like go eat somewhere and be like, hey, you ever want microgreens or whatever? But the Refresh Market and Sprout, NOLA, the organization in general are just like really great advocates for new growers. So we benefited a lot from plugging into their network.
And then once you start showing up at the market, you just get customers. Once they start buying and they come back, I mean, you just got to be there. And being consistent is important too. Like showing up to the market once and then showing up like 3 weeks later or whatever, you're not going to be able to build the same customer base. Like when we were every Tuesday, I probably 50% of our customers would come every week. And then you start getting like some chefs through there. Like there's just like being out there and being visible is really important. Yeah. Yes, sir.
My question is, what are you doing for rodents? Because me and Mr. Johnson have been having that conversation since the hurricane, since Katrina. We have a serious rodent problem with the raccoons and not so much the squirrels, the raccoons and the possums. And that's been one of the problems we had in Central City at our outdoor garden, the possums and the raccoons, and they're real large. So when I passed it last night, I was going to ask you that this morning. What do you do to keep them out of here?
We have lots of cats that are not our cats.
Neighborhood cats.
We have like probably at least half a dozen neighborhood cats that help with the smaller rodents. Definitely, we do get some occasional rodent presence in our greenhouse, especially like they'll rifle through our microgreens trays. We haven't had problems that I've noticed with like raccoons or possums. We have a neighborhood raccoon that gets free cat food at the neighbor's porch, so I don't think it's interested in our vegetables.
It lives in the drain right there. You can see it popping
Sometimes
out.
it comes out during the day. It's very creepy. Do you have a fence? I think the fence probably helps a lot with kind of like the sewer critters that might come up, like the raccoon. So we've been pretty lucky here to not have large-scale pest problems. On the West Bank, we have dogs that I have a theory that our dogs deter a lot because we bring them out there a lot. They, mark all around it. Because knock on wood, fingers crossed, we haven't had a ton of large-scale pest pressure out there either, or large-sized pest pressure.
We've had bugs.
We've had tons of bugs. Yes.
Yeah. Your CSA shares, how much are they? And I'm curious about the response. So mid-March, we had COVID coming in, and then in the summer, in the heat, that's when a lot of the farmers are decreasing, but then you have a demand for local product.
We took off the summer.
Okay.
Yeah. We try to take off every summer.
So what are your weeks that you started for the fall for your CSA?
Mid-September. This is the end of our third week.
Third week, okay.
So we were off. Our last share, I think, was like, we were hoping to make it to July, but we just didn't. Things were just petering out. So we ended at like the third week of June or something, and then we came back the second week of September, third week.
And that was something that we planned from the beginning, is that our season would mostly be September through June, or as far as, into June as we could get. Especially if our model is a CSA, because, definitely things grow here in the summer, including the grass, including the weeds. But we've just found that the labor involved in keeping things alive, even like by the time early mid-June rolls around, is just too much, and the heat is too much, and we need a break. I recommend if anyone wants to do this for a full-time job, build in a break for yourself. It's a lot of physical work. If you want to do it for 40 years, 50 years, it's very exhausting, especially if this is a harsh climate. And if we wanted to have the diversity of crops that we want to offer our farm share members, growing in the summer would be just almost impossible to get those greens. Yeah, we could grow a few things, hot peppers, eggplant, okra.
So for your workers, they also Are they still working, doing maintenance, or did they go off to? Or
These are our summer
yeah,
workers.
summer workers. Okay.
Yeah, these
They
were our
both
summer
work
workers
what,
this year.
like 5 to 10 hours a week or something, just doing mowing and
Yeah,
minimal
last
maintenance.
summer we tried to grow stuff, so it was here a little more regularly.
Yeah, Nora can tell you what it's like to
It
try to
didn't
grow.
go super well. I don't think we aren't like leaning into local crops as much as some places are, which maybe would help in the summer. So the stuff that we tried to grow in the spring, we were just trying to continue into the summer, and it didn't. They're just not happy. It was
Yeah.
too hot, and we didn't irrigate last summer, so that was a little tough too.
It was really important for us to have a greenhouse almost immediately when we started. The first couple rounds of seeds that we had were not through a greenhouse. They were, we had like foam insulation board, 1-inch foam insulation board with a heat mat on top of it plugged into an outlet next to our kitchen table, and it was all on our kitchen table during that really cold spell in January 2018. And we were germinating like tomatoes and peppers and eggplant, among other things like lettuce and other greens, but we had like a little grow light. I wouldn't recommend that setup. It kind of worked, but the plants were very unhappy, very unhealthy. If you are going to use grow lights, I recommend like really setting it up properly. We kind of were like hybrid grow lighting until we could get our greenhouse up. And plants really need that like full-on immersion in light. I had never experimented with like growing out of my house before, and it was a good lesson. So we were like kind of at the same time planning to build this greenhouse, and the first one that we built was actually made out of PVC. It was super cheap. Like we went to the Green Project and bought 20 foot long poles of PVC. Or yeah, 10 20 foot long poles of PVC that we
You just use a string.
well we pounded 3-foot stakes of rebar into the ground, popped the PVC over the rebar. Well, first we put down the fabric and then put the rebar through the fabric, and then you can just bend the PVC and kind of secure it around that rebar, and then we had a string that we tied around each PVC to keep them equally distant apart. And this is
And you stake the string down.
This is a technique that Elliot Coleman up in Maine used a lot to make kind of like shoulder season tunnels when things were getting cold. It was a really great, really cheap solution for the beginning, but again, it was one of those things that was kind of like cheaply made that after we got a moderate windstorm, kind of collapsed in on itself. And luckily we were already planning on replacing the greenhouse and scrambled to do it like that weekend, I think, once it was clear that PVC was starting to like warp and the string never could maintain that 4-foot distance between the purlins. So I would recommend if you want to make a greenhouse that's going to last, you can still do it pretty cheaply. The Johnny's Seeds website has a whole section called the Growers Library, where they have a lot of really useful information, including, I linked to it here in the greenhouse section, including instructions for putting up a greenhouse like this using chain link fence top rail, and they sell a hoop bender, or we know a few growers who have them and you can borrow one. We just borrowed one from our friend Ellis, and you can bend that top rail using that hoop bender that you kind of like fix in place, and you just use your body weight to leverage it, and it becomes a half of these purlins, and then they meet in the middle, and you can tech screw them together. And I think, are they in?
There's ground posts.
They're in ground posts, so you can buy. For those.
That's all. You can get that all at Home Depot. You get, I think it's 3-foot ground
posts,
posts, and then you get the top rail. You hammer the ground posts in. We didn't have the proper ground post count thing, but recommend getting that. And yeah, I mean, we put this up. We had some volunteers, but we put this up in like 2 hours, 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
Now you're showing off, Annie.
And then we got the connectors, those over Carl's head there. Those are the
And I find 12 feet wide is really nice. Like, there's plenty of space to walk down with a hose, and a pallet fits on each side. And I mean, we use pallets for everything. We use cinder blocks for everything. We use clamps a lot. These are like all the things that have turned out to be some of the most important tools for us, or just things that either are free, like pallets, or cheap, like cinder blocks. They're like $1.50 at Home Depot. Great for weights when you don't want things to fly away in a storm, and great for propping up
table legs.
I was gonna ask if you, this is not related to like greenhouse structure, but if you have advice for starting fall crops in the late summer, like in the greenhouse, because we like struggled a lot with things just getting like fried, or like keeping them in the shade. They got really leggy. So like, how do you deal with that?
So what we do is we germinate everything in the shade, and then once it's up, we move it to the sun, and we water it. We water it twice a day, which is enough for us. If it gets like much more direct sun or wind, it may need more than twice a day. But I also know that other growers will put their trays in their cooler, which are like at night. Like Ellis and Timothy and Madeline at Compostela will germinate their first couple of lettuce plantings. I think what they do is they'll seed them, and then they'll keep them in the cooler at night, and then bring them out maybe in the shade during the day until they germinate, and then they get pretty near perfect germination. We're still not 100% perfect at germinating in the heat, especially last season. We had like 3 plantings that just didn't do anything. Yeah. So it's definitely a struggle, but if you leave it in the shade even a little bit too long, it can get really leggy.
Yeah. Like all of our like kale and cabbage are just like this tall.
Yeah. I think once it's up, bring it into the sun and just be really aggressive about watering it. That's worked better for us, but still not 100%. Because it's like we're kind of a reverse season from a lot of the advice out there, where they're starting those things in March and April. In a cold climate, they're talking about heat. And we're like, how do we just like keep this intense sun and blasting heat off of it? That in general has been a big lesson for us. Like trying, there's a ton of resources out there, like the Johnny's website, or like YouTube videos, or just these companies that sell high tunnels or greenhouses. They all have like really, really great advice, but it's not specifically geared for our climate. And trying to kind of parse through that and adapt it to our climate has been a little bit of a learning curve. Most information out there that I've seen definitely operates under the assumption that you have a very cold winter, and your main season is April through October. So just take that information with a little bit of the knowledge that we're a little bit flipped from that. I'm hoping that we'll start to attract some of those companies to like come down, set up in Mississippi, Louisiana, Taylor, have like a whole new growing set of info for our climate.
do you have any other thoughts about the greenhouse?
Irrigation, which is based out of Canada and French Canada. And when we first started, we had half overhead, half drip tape because of certain things we were growing, like tomatoes and eggplant things outside. We didn't want overhead on those. And so you can call Dubois and probably other irrigation companies, and they'll really walk you through setting up a system for your property based on your flow rate. So like we took a 5-gallon bucket and timed how long it took to fill up from our water source, which is just city water, and used that calculation to talk to this guy who helped us figure out an irrigation system. After going through all of that with him, I think if you're up for it, it's better to just figure it out yourself, because some things didn't quite translate the way that he thought they should. I don't know if it was a pressure issue or just like kind of understanding the landscape a little better, being here every day. But the irrigation has never been quite perfect here. I really hate drip irrigation personally. It's just like so much plastic that you have to move constantly, and it rips really easily. And if you're turning the bed over, which we do constantly, like these beds get cropped out like 5 or 6 times a year. Having to move all of that constantly, it was just a pain in the butt. And a lot of people like drip because it conserves water, which is really great for certain climates where water is much more of an issue than it is here. But for us, a lot of what we grow really needs that kind of cooling effect also of the water. Like in the summer, we will irrigate 4 times a day with overhead, just to cool things off essentially, and like make sure that this super sandy soil, which this was irrigated this morning, so it's nice, but you can see like how kind of crumbly and just sandy this is, and when it's dry, it really looks like sand, and that environment just like very quickly dries out our crops. Like we can get a 6-inch rainstorm, and like if it's hot the next day we have to irrigate here, whereas on the West Bank 6 inches of water would be way too much, and we wouldn't have to irrigate for really ever. I mean, we don't really irrigate over there, but we have a sprinkler.
So given that y'all use city water here, do you pay like a special rate, or is there something special that you have to do to use that water?
That's a great question, Marcus. The city doesn't know anything about agricultural meters, I think. Although we're actually technically in the city on the West Bank, and we haven't gotten charged yet for water there. I'm assuming at some point we're going to get hit with a giant water bill. But I believe we tried to set it up as an agricultural meter there, but I don't know what's happened because I've never seen anything from them. They've never communicated with me about it. But here, this is a saga of us having to say we don't have sewer here, because your water bill is for the water in and out. We only pay for water in, or we should only be paying for water in, because we don't have a toilet or any drains. So like literally 3 years of trying to get that irrigation, what is it, sewer, off of my water bill, so it's like half of the bill, so I only pay half the bill every time. And it's a regular rate, so we sometimes pay like $500 a month, like in the summer when we're irrigating for 4 times a day. But yeah, like I had a hearing about it. I've called them probably 10 times, and every time it's like, what? Okay, I'll talk to someone, and nothing. Except the hearing, she was like, oh my God, yes, of course. And they sent someone to make sure we didn't have a toilet here. And that person was like, you do not have a toilet here, you're all good. And that was 3 years ago.
She took a picture.
Took a picture. Yeah, I mean, it's just the system, they just don't have any kind of like setup for an urban, like a garden that's not on a residence.
Even though there are dozens of gardens.
Yeah, I think
using city water without sewer.
There have been a couple times where it's come off the bill, and then the next month it'll come back on. So I just don't pay it. I was told don't pay it. Pay what you think you owe. So that's what I do.
City council person now? Have you tried?
Is it Chris?
When?
Palmer? Or is
Palmer.
it Gwen?
Palmer or Wynn?
I think it's either Palmer or
Palmer or
Gwen.
Wynn? I think it's Palmer or Wynn.
Yeah, she's New Orleans East, but she's also here.
She's on this side, right?
Yeah.
She's Wynn.
We haven't talked
You
specifically.
met her. You met her.
We
Mm-hmm.
let Margie do all of
Margie
the
does
advocating.
all of our advocacy.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
What about water collection with the barrels? Can you use that?
We haven't, but could.
With the barrels?
Yes.
Yeah, so you definitely can collect water with the barrels. But then if they're low, you have to pump it out to get enough pressure. Definitely if you want overhead. I know people who've had success using barrels with drip because it requires a lot lower water pressure. I at one point even looked into a solar powered water pump.
That was my next thing. There's a solar powered pump for the water, and it's very efficient.
Do you have one, or have you tried
No,
it?
I've seen some. I've been looking around the last couple of years.
I mean, you also have to have like, you have to have a roof or something to collect it
No,
in
you
the
could
right
take
place.
you have a roof. You could put a stand. The guy had a stand about 8 feet, with 3 barrels, and that was part of the natural drip. And then he had a solar pump. He had a solar panel operated pump made into a cone, and that generated the power to pump the water straight out. And he wasn't using the pump, he just had the natural drip, because you got 8 feet in the air with barrels and small holes, and it was going straight out of his land. I should have took the pictures, but I'm going to get back up there in a minute. I think the water collection and purification of the water will be a little more efficient than our sewer system here, our sewage and water board here in the city.
Yeah. We've thought about it for other property, which is a lot bigger, and like here everything can be reached by a hose. But we've thought about having like a water collection somewhere that's like not as proximal to the water source that we could have as like emergency watering if we needed to have it be.
I think you put some 55-gallon drums, you put them on a 6-feet stand, you wouldn't require anything from the city. You run the runoff with a cut-off back with the valves on.
Yeah.
I talked to my architect friend and see if he could do it, and I'd get it to Marcus and show you.
Cool. Yeah, check it out. It's definitely, I know Speakeasy, are you familiar with Speakeasy? They're in this neighborhood too. They have a very cool water collection set up with, it's all solar, right? Do they have a pump in it, or is it just?
Yeah, they have a pump.
Yeah. They're a really good model for like even like a smaller or like self-contained kind of garden.
Yeah, but we just use
City water.
Yes, tools that are useful and less useful. Can you grab the seed starting stuff there? So this system, or this tool, is part of the paper pot transplanting system, which some of you may be a little familiar with from videos or reading about it. It's a common tool that's used in Japan, and that's where the technology originated. And it's recently started to gain popularity here in the States. It allows you to transplant a lot of plants with one person in a very short amount of time if the conditions are perfect or conducive to it. Nora does all of our paper pot transplanting at this point, and can probably tell you about the optimum conditions versus less optimum.
Yeah, I mean, it basically just will get stuck on any debris or obstacle in a bed. So the lengthiest thing that I'm doing when I'm planting a bed is raking and cleaning out the bed of debris. So like rocks, old plant material is actually pretty annoying when it gets stuck on that. mean, you can like easily rip it and start again, and it's not a big deal, or go back and bury stuff after. But when it works nicely, it takes 10 minutes to plant a whole bed.
Yeah, so we got this initially for a specific group of crops that we knew we were going to want to plant a lot of and a lot of successions of. So like our salad mix, which we just cut loose and bag, is the Salanova salad mix that Johnny's Seed Company sells. And that works really well with this system. We also initially we tried to grow beets with this system. I did find that that was really worth it. They didn't do very well here, but like Nora was mentioning, it can be a huge pain if there's any kind of debris. And these beds started with a lot more debris. Like if you look along our wall, our mural wall under the eyes here, like all of that concrete, those came out of our beds. Like all of those chunks of concrete rock, I just call them rocks now, but that, you know, could get caught up in this system, or yeah, like roots, or like the compost if it wasn't super fine. So it was a lot of troubleshooting initially. I would not recommend the system for people who have chunky or like rocky or heavily debris soil. I would not use the system yet on the West Bank. I'm hoping that we'll get our beds to a point where we can use it on the West Bank, because it is a really great tool when it works. But there are other reasons why we decided to go with this. We thought about it a lot initially, and one of those reasons is that the trays hold 264 plants versus more traditional kind of like plug trays. The ones that we use hold either 72 plants or 128 plants. So that's a big difference of another 140 or so plants from even our next biggest plant, our tray. And so that allows us to grow a lot more plants in our 30-foot greenhouse. Whereas if we were to do these things, transplant all this by hand, we would need like twice the space at least. The other thing is that some of the things we grow in here are things that could be seeded directly into the ground. Like we used to grow Hawkeye turnips, like those little salad turnips. Chelsea and Christian harvested those yesterday. Those we used to grow in this system, and they do pretty well in here actually. But that's something that now that we have more space in the West Bank, we just seed directly into the ground. But when we were growing them here, we could start them in these paper chains, and they would have about a 3-week time frame in the greenhouse, during which we could have something else planted out in the field. And because we had such small space, we were trying to just maximize as much stuff not being in the ground when it didn't need to be. So getting a head start in the greenhouse was hugely important to us. We also now grow scallions. I think that's my favorite thing to grow here, like scallions. If we had more space, I would do even more onions. Just like, I would put this whole field in onions if we had the space and time for it, using a paper pot system, because I don't know if y'all have ever spent like a whole day transplanting onions. It's just like, it can be really tedious, and we can't, like our hands just aren't big or small enough to get the like most efficient spacing if we're doing it by hand. So you might then want to direct seed it, but again, like if you don't have the space to let it sit for that long, or if you want more control over your germination process like we have in the greenhouse, this is a really nice system for that. So we do successions of scallions, and you can see like, you can't see them here, but they're over by the greenhouse. And the spacing is just super tight, they're really neat, it's 4 rows, like we probably get, I don't know, Nora's already harvested like 45 bunches from it, and it hardly looks like he's done anything.
Like probably 4 or 5 feet.
Yeah. It's amazing how much you can get through this system with something like scallions. And you know, we'll probably get like 200 bunches off of that bed, which makes, and the labor that went into that was that we seeded it, Nora planted it, and now the harvesting labor, which isn't nothing for scallions. They're a little labor intensive, but still that
Everyone loves them.
that amount of work versus the amount of return on that space, that 45, 50 foot space, is pretty incredible with this system, especially for a crop like that.
From a business perspective, let's say that you spent about $3,000 on this piece of equipment. What has been your return on investment just from making that upfront investment, saving in labor costs, labor hours, and things like that? What have you seen from that?
I would say, so we haven't done a return breakdown, but if anyone's interested, we have done a per tray cost versus like, I don't think we've done it versus return per bed, but we have broken it down per tray, per crop, per bed, what the cost is with labor and materials. I would say we have at this point made up the cost of this for sure with the labor. Probably just scallions alone has made it up, because it's like, if we were to transplant that many scallions, it would take all day. It would take our whole crew all day. And if we were to direct seed them, we wouldn't be able to grow, you know, like our other quick growing greens crops that we make other money on. So it's part of a bigger system that when you take certain things out of one realm, it allows that space to be filled with another thing that could potentially generate profit or generate some other added value for the farm. But we also use the trays to grow all of our microgreens, and that's a really nice kind of dual use for these trays, because these trays they're expensive. I think they're like $6 to $8 a tray, but you know, they're like, you could like step on them, you could run a tractor over them. I wouldn't recommend it, but if you accidentally do, you could still use it. And versus, like, I don't know if anyone's had experience with other microgreens trays specifically, or just any kind of plastic plug tray. They're very flimsy, and you know, you want to like take good care of them, because who wants to buy them every season, which we inevitably end up doing anyway. Like, you know, we kind of always cycle through some, but these are kind of, I feel like they have a lifetime warranty. You know, they're very durable, and they're a nice depth for microgreens, and they also drain, which is nice in our climate where too much moisture can be an issue, like in a fixed space on a hot, humid day. In the shade, which is where we keep our microgreens, that water can kind of like really log up in the tray. So I like that they're drainable and you know, multifunctional versus with microgreens and our actual crops. Some growers will actually not get the planter, which you can do. The planter itself is like $800 or $900. So you can get some components. Like there's a grower in Gentilly, Rome. He's starting to grow vegetables, and I think he was saying that he has a tool called the zipper tool, which is just like a long stem, long handled tool that allows him to make a furrow, because this will make this like kind of tooth behind here will make the furrow as we pull it along.
See, it has like a band.
This will make the furrow while the paper chain is getting planted into that furrow. And then And these, these wings will cover the furrow back up. So the whole, for as long of the year as we can, without, you know, exhausting ourselves, and start to see like where that demand is and kind of if it's more nuanced than what we think.
Another thing about that is a lot of the local growers here are focused on selling to restaurants because there's so many restaurants, and it's easier just in terms of marketing. Like you just have one customer or like a handful of customers rather than having to do a retail situation where you might get paid more per item, but there's more effort involved in like setting up a market. We decided to go with the market. Like we started out with a couple of restaurants, but our feeling was that we wanted our food to be mostly consumed by New Orleans residents and home cooks, and not as much by restaurants who were serving tourists or whatever else, because that they already have sort of a pretty decent supply of good food, and felt like our community needed it more. And then also you do just get a higher margin selling retail. Like you could sell. We were selling our salad greens for about $13 a pound when we sell at retail, versus like we wouldn't be able to get more than $8 a pound selling it to restaurants. So that's a big difference.
Yeah, a big difference for a third of an acre of growing space. You know, it might not be a big difference to some of the growers who have 20 acres of salad greens and you're just growing
You just
one
need
thing.
to move it all.
So those were some of the factors that went into our decision. The way that we started marketing was we just set up a farm stand at Solo Espresso, which is a few blocks away, and we live across the street. And we kind of just wanted to have some visibility. That was back when you weren't technically allowed to sell things on site, even if you grew them on site as part of the local zoning ordinance. That has since changed. There's been a big shift in towards more favorability towards urban agriculture, where we could now set up a farm stand on site, and that would be legal within the eyes of like the local Orleans Parish zoning board. So that's why we shifted a few blocks away, just to kind of get visibility in our neighborhood, and we started doing that once a week on Saturdays. And through that, we got on the radar of the Crescent City Farmers Market.
Well, started with Refresh.
Oh, and we started with Refresh.
Have you guys heard of Refresh Farmers Market? It's a farmers market that's run until like last week. It was outside of Whole Foods on Mondays. Now they're set up around the block from Whole Foods. But it's run through Sprout NOLA and like the Refresh, like that broad street Refresh development center. And that is a no fee for vendors market. So their intent is to have people who are not are starting
They're not yet generating enough revenue to justify paying a market fee.
Yeah, so it's like a beginner farmers market, and then they actually connected us to Crescent City Farmers Market. Crescent City Farmers Market, which is the bigger market organization, asked Sprout and Refresh if they had any vendors that they'd recommend who were selling vegetables, and so they put us in touch. So that, yeah, I mean, Refresh is a really great, even if you're just growing, like, you just have a small market or small garden in your backyard, but you have like a lot of some herbs or whatever, like you could go and sell there if you wanted to spend the time doing that. Like, you don't have to have a full established business to do that.
And they also have a truck farm table where you can just contribute to a table. You don't have to set up your own booth, and you'll just get paid for whatever you contribute that sells at that table. And we've done that a lot also as we were getting started. Because that is a challenge, like before you have enough to make it worth your time, or before you have enough to present to a restaurant, because the restaurants want higher quantity, but you have more than you can eat yourself. It's kind of this awkward in between, like how do you start to build that customer base But New Orleans is such a great place to do like a pop-up or to tag on with someone who's doing something else, to get in someone else's space. I just find like the community support for entrepreneurs and new businesses is really strong here, and much stronger and much like lower barrier to entry than I've seen in like in the Boston area where we were living. Yeah, so that's kind of, so we started with like a lot of salad greens, a lot of like radishes, carrots. We tried beets. We tried a lot of things on this space. We have since honed it into quick growing greens and salad mixes. Microgreens, which we started about a year, 8 months to 12 months after we first broke ground here, which has been a great addition. It's something you can grow on a small space, something that people are excited about, something you can grow year round. And we do a lot of herbs here now as well. We do a lot of successions of herbs like scallions, dill, cilantro. We have a small perennial herb space here that produces a fair amount for their tiny 10-foot beds. And we've shifted a lot of our other kind of like heavier feeder vegetables to the West Bank because we have the space now. So I think if you are trying to start in a small space, just thinking about those higher value crops. They're also tend to be the freshest crops and the ones that people want to buy locally. They're more inspired by, when they see like that fresh bag of beans.
We have a new person. Hi.
Process of planting is just happening while you're just walking through this machine. And so the zipper tool allows you to make that furrow, and then you can manually plant your paper chain. And then the zipper tool, I think if you flip it around and use it to the non-furrow side, it'll just close up that furrow. So you can kind of use some of these components a la carte. But I think it all comes down to what is your soil like? Is your soil workable enough that you can make a nice furrow and then close it up with a tool, or are you really gonna have to get in there with your hand or with like a trowel? Like we have to really kind of like pound our soil to get it loose enough to plant into on the West Bank, even after broad forking and ripening. So overall, like this has been really beneficial here, and our landlords are potentially very soon going to start building houses here. So we're going to keep shifting to the West Bank, and I'm really hoping that we can shift this with us to at least a certain area that we can like really get the soil to a point where it can be usable. I'm going to miss scallions growing in these paper chains.
The seeding has some cool little features. So this is the paper chain itself. This has 264 cells here. You use these claws. Then you put it. I kind of messed it up. It sits in here, and then once you fill it up with soil, it just holds itself, and you take that frame out. And then you can use this dibbler to make little, press that in. It's designed to fit the cells. And then this handy thing, what is this called? It's a seed dropper?
Drop seed plate. Drop seeder.
I don't know if you can see here, but you fill up the plate with this, there's 2 layers of plastic with holes in them. And you start it out with them not lined up, and then when you're ready to drop, you like pour the seeds out and make sure there's a seed in every hole, and then you just go like that, and it just drops it directly into the hole. So that saves like, I don't know, like the difference between dropping 264 seeds.
Yeah, it doesn't work for every kind of seed.
Yeah.
Pelleted seeds, it works really well with.
Not all seeds get through these holes correctly. There might be different plates.
We have 2 plates, and they sell more plates for different size seeds.
Some seeds are just not round though, and so
Getting a
if
square
you're trying to get like a certain amount in a hole, it doesn't really work. But it is really nice for round seeds.
Yeah, so it's a whole system thing. Pretty neat.
And
Pretty
these are
neat.
things that you can buy
Japanese.
just to help with seeding too. Like not through this company in particular. There are drop seeders and other kinds of time-saving tools for seeding that help if you're doing a lot of certain things kind of over and over like we do. Yeah.
Where do you get your other plug trays?
Or other what?
The other plug trays.
Oh, the plug trays. We have gotten those mostly from Bootstrap Farmer because they make the heavier duty kind that don't break down as quickly. Like they're stronger, more expensive. They're maybe like $3 a tray.